Welcome to the Creator's Calendar, another opportunity to think red ink. You can discern the face of the sky, but how is it you cannot discern this time? We're going to have a good time, but your life's not going to be the same. You'll never look in the sky and not think of your Creator after tonight. It's a beautiful, beautiful ride you're about to go on. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the Son of Man that thou visitest him? The calendar of Yahuveh is painted across every evening sky. As the Crescent develops from its first birth at the first Hodesh in the evening, and then finally grows across the sky and ever larger, you can actually see the Creator's calendar in numbers once you understand that each of the crescents pertains to a particular day. He has given us His calendar in the night sky. As you look up and see a crescent that's near half, we know that we're near day 7, day 8. As the crescent continues across the sky, moving ever more toward the east as the sun is setting in the west, growing more and more as the days go by, soon we have our full moon that shows us we are at day 14, day 15 of the month. The Creator's calendar is the gift of God to us, His man. The crescents across the sky actually become, in your own mind, as you learn what they are, days of the month. As a matter of fact, if you'll just take those crescents as we know them and lay them upon a grid, you'll see that they actually create a calendar. Now, we've created this calendar from the moons. What we're looking at is 1 month of a year. Yes, 1 month. That's where we get the word month. So, in the Creator's calendar, we know that it is based upon the moon. Why did He create the sun and the moon? That they might be for times and for seasons. Let them be for days and for years. What we're dealing with is the calendar of Yahuveh versus the calendars of man. Man has attempted to influence the calendar that God has given us. It is His calendar. It is His way of reckoning time. But man has presumed himself upon the calendar. Actually, we could title this seminar, The Creator's Calendar versus the created calendars. Why does man do this? Why do we want our own time? And why is this such a big deal? It's a big deal for several reasons, actually. One is that the creation has changed, thus making a necessity for a calculated calendar. We must calculate the calendar based upon not only the moon and not only the position of the planets, but we also have to make it corrected for the problems in creation. And we'll learn about that as we go. Number 2, the other problem that makes this a big deal is that men have presumed to change the calendar of Yahuveh. Presumed to change it, I say, because in that changing, men have presumed an authority that they do not have. 3, the calendar has been polluted by paganism. Paganism seems to rear its ugly head everywhere we look. But we must rid it from our vocabulary, and we must rid it from our reckoning of God's calendar and His holy days. It is detestable to Him, and so if paganism is a part of our calendar, we must rid ourselves of it. Number 4, the best reason ever, is that Jehovah has given us a calendar by which we should live. If He's given us a calendar, shouldn't we use the calendar that He gave us? So, reason 4, more than any other reason, He gave us a calendar. Why don't we use it? The idea of recreating the calendar of God has a lot of implications and a lot of rewards. Actually, you're going to answer questions that you've had all your life. Like, have you ever wondered why there's 360 degrees in any circle? Did you know that when you break down these degrees into measurements smaller than degrees, they break down into measurements of time? Why is that? Could 360 also be a measurement of time? So, what's wrong with our calendar? Well, have you ever wondered why we need a leap year? Why do we need a leap year? Well, the reason is that the creation has changed. The creation, the earth that we live in, has changed from God's original earth. What's wrong with our calendar? Have you ever wondered why you spell the month February? February. What's up with that? Why do you do that? Well, we do that because that's the proper way of spelling it. That's the way my wife would answer you. She's an English teacher. But I want to know, where did it come from? You'll find that out about me. I'm not very satisfied with just the way things are. My friend comes over. He walks into the house and there's little piles of tissue paper, toilet tissue paper, all over the kitchen. He's confirming, isn't he? What's going on here? What's this all about? And I said, no, I don't take anybody's word for anything. And that thing says there's 1,000 sheets on that row. He says, so is there? And I said, hey, find out for yourself. All right. So, what's wrong with our calendar? Well, again, have you ever wondered why we spell Wednesday like we spell Wednesday? Why do we spell it that way? You're going to find that it's because our calendar has been polluted by paganism. Have you ever wondered why many believe that June is the best month to be married? Again, polluted by paganism. Have you ever wondered why there's 28 days in February? Because creation has changed and men have presumed to change the calendar of Yahuveh. Have you ever wondered why, if the months are based on the moon, as we've all learned in school, why don't the days of the month follow the moon's phases? You're going to learn the answers to these and many other questions. All have nearly the same answer. Creation has changed, men have presumed to change the calendar, and our calendar has been polluted by paganism. You may have wondered, why do the last 4 month names all resemble each other, yet are different from the other names of the months in the calendar? There's a reason for this, and we're going to find it. But what you'll find is falling back into those 3 categories, one of which is men have presumed to change our calendar. The truth is, all calendars have problems. How many days are there in the year? How many days are there in a month? How many hours are there in a day? Those questions are hard to answer in whole numbers because the creation has changed. Something is wrong. I'm amazed as we travel across the country, meeting people who do travel and go to different tourist locations, how they become very enthralled in the beauty of creation. Have you seen the Grand Canyon? What a wonderful thing that is. Well, that's true. It is breathtaking. But it's not the creation of God. Now stay with me. When God created the earth, He created it in perfection. It likely today does not resemble anything like what He created. What you're looking at is a pile of rubble left over from the destruction that came upon the earth through the flood of Noah. The Grand Canyon is simply an outlet from a glacier that melted and flowed out to the sea. It cut a canyon through there as that water exited from those plains up in that area. So, what is this beauty in creation? No doubt there are spectacular sights to see, and we love the Purple Mountain's majesty. But we have to understand that when God created it, it was perfect. And what we see today are simply piles of rubble covered in grass and trees. We must remember, from the beginning, it was not so. From the beginning, at the beginning, the world was perfect. It was mathematically perfect. It was accurate. It was precise. The motion and movement of the planets were absolutely perfect. But today, it's not that way. So what's happened? How can we rediscover that perfection? How can we rediscover the calendar of Yahuveh from the Scriptures? Actually, we'll find that the story of Noah contains just such clues. We can take the facts and figures that are given in the story of Noah and recreate a timeline that will help us discover the calendar of Yahuveh. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. In this reading, we have heard dates and days mentioned. We've been given numbers of days in between dates. You can actually take a piece of paper and a pencil, and with just basic math, which is about all I understand, you can find the calendar of Yahuveh in your Bible. Now, watch what happens. This timeline begins to form. And the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters ceased continually until the 10th month. And in the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. Are you seeing this? Do you hear these times and date lines and milestones along this marker? They will become the calendar of God. And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and sent forth a raven. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And he stayed yet other 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. It came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried. So, tell me, how many years did we just deal with? How many months? How many days? It's all there if we just simply take his timeline, remove the references to days. Now, where did these references come from? These references are ones that they made and ones that we made from date to date. We could tell how many days from date to date. And so, when we take all these days and put them into a stack, so to speak, add them up, what do they come to? Very interesting. 361 days. Not 365. But why 361? If you were to ask how many days there are in a year, in our vernacular, we would say 365 and a quarter. But if I ask you how many days between January 1st to January 1st, it's not 365, it's 366. Why? Because we have January 1st twice. So don't let this throw you. This is actually first month 1 until first month 1. 361 days. Because it's inclusive of first month 1. So what we find is in the original year was 360 days. Now, let's start at first month 1 and go 7 days. Now we're at first month 7. What are we doing? We're actually assigning dates to these days. And it can be done simply by adding 40 days. It takes us to second month 17, which was a reference in the Bible. And then some of these references were not in the Bible, some of them were, but they all fall in line into this perfect sequential order that is actually revealing the calendar that was pre-flood, before Noah. We're seeing the perfect calendar of God before the destruction took place, before creation was changed. Now, the fun part is to extrapolate those dates into known events. Noah was called, we know, on first month 1. And we know that the rain began on first month 7. The rain stopped second month 17. The Bible gave us that date. But there are dates now that we know that the Bible didn't give us. But we've extrapolated those dates from the information that we have, and we're actually building a calendar of events and assigning dates to the point that we can be so accurate as to say that dove number 3 was sent out of the ark on 12th month 1. Now take a look. What have we learned? Think about what you just saw. Before, in the pre-flood year, there were 360 days in the year. There were precisely 30 days in the month. But that's not the way we live now. So what happened? What happened was cataclysmic changes that came about because of the flood of Noah. The flood changed the atmosphere around the earth. It changed the weight of the earth. It changed the geometry of the earth. And it changed the revolution, the speed and orbit of the earth, and likely even the axis tilt. All of these affected the calendar of God. Now, why is that? The days don't follow God's calendar because the planets follow God's calendar. You have to understand that His calendar is based upon the motion of the planets, not the reverse. So, when the motion of the planets is changed, when the axis of the earth is changed and its weight and its geometry and its orbit, the apogee and the perigee of its orbit is changed, the calendar must change as well. But how are we going to keep track of this? Because now it's all messed up. He has a way. The earth has changed drastically from when it was first created. Scientists agree that for some reason the continents seem to fit together. But what they don't seem to agree upon is just how they fit together. Do the continents slide and connect? Well, they slide and connect on this side of the earth, but they also slide and connect on this side of the earth. So, what's going on? How can this be? Well, you see, the continents used to fit together like a jigsaw puzzle, but that was when the earth was smaller. Smaller? Yes. When did the earth grow? When God added elements to the earth, like the vapor canopy that was about the earth. He described it this way. He says, and water was above the earth. So you see, because God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, but there went forth a mist from the ground and watered the whole face of the ground. There was no such thing as rain. The Bible also says that there was water inside the earth. Now here's the interesting thing, and watch the earth. As we extract the water portion of the earth compresses to its original size, and the continents fit perfectly. With the vapor canopy intact, this is likely the way the earth appeared before the flood of Noah as it hung in space. But the flood of Noah occurred. Everything started to change. The Bible says that not only did the vapor canopy come down upon the earth and it began to rain and add water to the earth, but the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. So the water inside the earth became outside the earth. The continents started to spread, and the circumference increased. But wait, physics takes place here. If the circumference increases, then the rotation speed will likely decrease. If the weight of the earth changes, then its orbit around the sun is going to change. All these things are going to affect the calendar of God because the earth's motion in the universe has been changed and affected. Now, because of these cataclysmic changes, we now have seasons that vary widely according to our latitude on the earth. There's 365.242199 days in a year. And there's 29.5305888853 days in a month. Why these odd numbers? Why aren't we back to whole numbers? Because creation has changed. It has caused a problem in the calculation of the calendar, in that if the months are 30 days long and the actual month is 29 and a half days long, those half days start adding up and we start seeing what's called the precession of the equinoxes. And think about this. Who knows how many hours there were in a day compared to the original? If the earth slowed down, then it likely sped faster in those days, which made the day actually shorter than what we understand to be 24 hours. Now our calendar requires that adjustments be made. So to develop a biblical calendar, we must first know that we must adjust this calendar to the seasons. Men have come up with all kinds of ways of doing this. They have taken these factors into consideration. The first one we're considering is that creation has changed. They know there's something wrong with trying to coordinate and rectify the motion of the sun and the moon and the stars into some kind of a calendar that is consistent. But it cannot be done because creation is in the havoc and chaos that came about because of the judgment of God upon the earth. The other factor that we have to consider if we're going to make our calendar is that men have presumed to change the calendar of God before. We don't want to be guilty of that. We don't want to be guilty of presuming to change God's calendar. What we want to do is do it according to what He says. So we must be very mindful of this. You can't take your own initiative to create a calendar. What we want to do is not really create a calendar, but discover the calendar of God in the Scriptures. And not be guilty of presuming to change it as men have tried to do. Now, first of all, we're going to want a reliable calendar. The problems of creating a reliable lunar calendar may explain why solar calendars, having months which no longer relate to the phase of the moon and being based only on the more predictable motion of the sun against the sky, have generally replaced lunar calendars in most societies. Now, the sun is a more predictable planet by which to make a calendar. Now, is this God's fault? No, it's not. He set everything up in creation perfectly, and now it's been tainted, and now it's been changed. But He will give us a solution for that problem. The lunar calendar is an attempt to do just such a thing. Because many farmers try to plant by the moon, it becomes very important to them that they know the phases of the moon. But we don't want to go to a lunar calendar because that's confusing. So they take a solar calendar and just place the moon's phases on the dates. Now that's what you've seen. That's how you determine what phase of the moon we're in. You look at your calendar and you look for the little circles and the little crescents to know what phase of the moon we're in. And that's a lunar calendar. It is very important to earth-conscious persons or farmers or perhaps werewolves to know exactly what phase the moon is in. Very similar to the calendar that you'd find in an almanac. Let's try to become familiar with the calendars that we deal with. The solar calendar is the calendar that you have hanging on your wall in the kitchen. The solar calendar is a calendar whose dates indicate the position of the earth on its revolution around the sun, or equivalently, the apparent position of the sun moving on the celestial sphere. The following are solar tropical calendars, and you can see the list there. The one we'll be dealing with is the Gregorian calendar. the one that we have today. Now, every one of these calendars has a year of 365 days, which is occasionally extended by adding an extra day to form a leap year. Why do we need a leap year? Because of the precession of the equinoxes. So this correction must be made in all calendars, and solar calendars use a leap year. The Gregorian calendar is the calendar that is used nearly everywhere in the world. It's a modification of the Julian calendar. It was decreed by Pope Gregory XIII, for whom it was named, on February 24th, 1582. Its years are numbered by the most familiar Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. The Gregorian calendar was devised because the mean year in the Julian calendar was slightly too long, causing the vernal equinox to slowly drift backwards in the calendar year. Now, 10 days were removed to realign the calendar to the seasons. What had happened was the Julian calendar had drifted. It required, when they went to the Gregorian calendar, a correction of 10 days. We have a synodic month. That's the time it takes for the moon to complete one cycle of phases. The problem is, that doesn't fit very easily into a solar year. It makes the constructing of an accurate lunisolar calendar nearly impossible. The most common solution to this problem is the Metonic Cycle, which takes advantage of the fact that 235 lunations occur in approximately 19 tropical years. However, a Metonic calendar, such as the Hebrew calendar, will drift against the seasons by about a day every 200 years. Therefore, the synodic month makes a Metonic calendar necessary, and also necessitates a leap year. Now, the Hebrews answered the leap year problem like this. They compensated for this drift by adding an extra month occasionally. The month of Nisan would occur 11 days earlier for 2 or 3 years, and then would jump forward 29 or 30 days, balancing out the drift. In ancient times, this month was added by observation. The Sanhedrin observed the conditions of the weather, the crops, and the livestock. And if these were not sufficiently advanced to be considered spring, an additional month was inserted into the calendar to make sure that Pesach would occur only in the spring. It is, after all, called Chag Aviv, the festival of spring. Now, Hillel II, in the 4th century, established a fixed calendar on the mathematical and astronomical calculations. This calendar, still in use, standardized the length of months and the addition of months over a course of a 19-year cycle, so that the lunar calendar realigns with the solar years. An additional Adar is added, for example, in the 3rd, 6th, 8th, 11th, 14th, 17th, and 19th years of that cycle. The current cycle that we are living in now began in the Jewish year 5758. On the Gregorian calendar, that's the year that began, October 2nd, 1997. The Jewish calendar is lunar-based, with each month representing one lunar cycle. That's the time it takes for the moon to complete one orbit around the Earth. That comes out to 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 halakim, or parts. The molad is the time of the moon's birth. There's a point in the moon's orbit in which it's positioned directly between the Earth and the Sun, making it invisible to anyone standing on the Earth's surface. The molad occurs when the moon has moved far enough from this position that a thin crescent of its illuminated surface becomes visible to a man on the Earth. The actual moment at which the moon becomes visible will vary slightly from the average molad. This is the reason the Jewish calendar is tweaked, so that Rosh Hodesh is as close as possible to the time in which the moon would actually be seen in Jerusalem if we were still relying on actual observation of the moon. This is why Rosh Hodesh will often occur a day or more after the average molad. If you follow the instructions to build a Hebrew calendar, you will come up with exactly the same calendar they have, because it is a mathematical calculation and consideration of certain postponements and rules according to the Jewish law. Here we see the Hebrew names of the months and the English equivalents, the number of the months according to the Scripture, how long they are, and the Gregorian equivalent names to the right. Now, to develop this biblical calendar, this calendar of God, we must know certain things. We must adjust this calendar to the seasons, because we've realized that creation has changed. We found now that the world powers, or pagans, accomplish this by scrapping the lunar altogether and developing a solar calendar. We learned that the Hebrew nations, at least after the 4th century, accomplished this by developing a calculated Metonic calendar. As we develop a biblical calendar, we must name the days and the months and the years. How will we do that? Did you know that most of the names of the days and months in our calendar came from paganism and worship of men? In order to honor and remember their gods, words and names in daily usage were replaced by these pagan gods' names. What better way to make their names household words than to assign them to everyday language? Every time we use these names, anyone may hear the names of pagan gods come from your mouth. Remember Exodus 23:13, "And in all these things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the names of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth." Here we have gods that are despicable to our God. Janus, Februa, Mars, Aphrilis, and Maya. We wouldn't dare say those names, or would we? If we change them to their modern counterparts, we see the very months of the year that we speak from our mouth. January, February, March, April, May. "And in all these things I've said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the names of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth." Deuteronomy 4:19, "And take heed unto yourselves, lest thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, thou shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them." Oh, Father God, we would never worship these planets. We would never mention them unnecessarily in our daily speech. Or would we? Well, let's just change these gods' names to their Germanic names. Freya, Thord, Tiu, Woden. These Germanic names, they still don't look familiar, do they? Well, let's just add the word day to them. See if they sound anything like words we use in our everyday vernacular. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Woden's Day, Thor's Day, Freya's Day, and Saturn Day. January was named after Janus, the god of doors and gates. Mythology teaches that the month was dedicated to the guardian of the doors of heaven. This is the two-headed god on your 401k prospectus. This is the two-headed god that is found in a worship temple. Yes, found in the Vatican. This is Janus, the two-headed god. Now, Februa. I apologize for the picture, but I cleaned it up by cutting it in half. February was named for the Roman goddess Februa, the mother of Mars. As patroness of passion, she's also known as Juno Februa. Now, Februas is the male counterpart of Februa, and her orgiastic rites were held on February 14th, St. Valentine's Day. Now, March is named after Mars. No, not the planet, the god of war. You see, the redness of the planet is a sign of blood. Now, this is a picture of Mars. I know that because I studied it and researched it deeply. Actually, his name is written at the bottom of his statue. Now, April, some say that April comes from the Latin word apparere, which means to open, or the springtime, the opening of the flowers. But mythology teaches a different story. Mythology tells us that the month was sacred to Venus, the Roman goddess of beauty. And for this reason, the name April comes not from apparere, but from Aprilis, which in turn comes from Aphrodite, the name given to the goddess of beauty by the Greeks. This is the one and the same as Astarte. Now, if you want to pronounce her name properly, if you want to pronounce it in her own language, you say Easter. In your King James Bible, she is listed as Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians. Now, is there any wonder why we hold the pagan holiday Easter in this season? The month of May is named after the goddess Maya, to whom the goddess sacrificed on the first day of the month. Maya was one of the Pleiades, the 7 daughters of Atlas and Pleione. You can find her constellation in Taurus, if you care to find it. June is named after Juno, the wife of Jupiter, the queen of the gods. This is a picture of Jupiter, and you can see his eye right there. If you concentrate very, very hard, you can see, yeah, there it is. Now it's coming to you. That is Jupiter. Now, this month was held sacred to Juno and was thought to be the best month, the luckiest month, for marriage. You see, Juno was the goddess of marriage. And you wondered why you needed to be married in June. We need to be more circumspect about what we do and why we do it. Listen to this. When the people saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices saying, "The gods are come down to us in the likeness of men." And they called Barnabas Jupiter and Paul Mercurius because he was the chief speaker. Now, they should be pleased because the people are accepting them. The apostles rent their clothes, crying out, "Why do you do these things? We preach unto you that you should turn from these vanities unto the living God, which made heaven and earth and the sea and all things that are therein." Acts 14:11 through 15. Now the Gregorian calendar gets very interesting. July was a month called Quintilis at one time. And with the introduction of Julius Caesar, this month's name was changed to July in honor of Julius Caesar, because his birthday was the 12th of that month. Now, August was first called Sextilis. It was thereafter named for Augustus Caesar. Now, consider this. Are we looking at a vestigial sign of the calendar of Yahuveh within our calendar that hangs on our kitchen wall? How can that be? Notice, pagan July was first called Quintilis. Pagan August was called Sextilis. What's the next month? September. And then, of course, October, November, December. Now, what do all these have in common? These have in common a numbering system that is a vestigial sign. You see, Quintilis means 5th. And Sextilis means 6th. September is 7. October, November, December is simply 8th, 9th, 10th. Is this a vestigial sign? Yes, it is a vestigial sign. And had the Roman Empire not fallen, we may not even have these months named as they are today, because they continued to name them after Roman man worship. Let me show you how this shows the calendar of God still yet today. Now, we're trying to name our days and months. We don't want to do it like the Hebrews did it, which meant that they turned it over to Babylonian paganism. Superstitions and paganism named their months for them. We don't want to do that. We certainly don't want to use the Gregorian calendar names because we have January, February, March, all named after gods. But I want you to look at these peculiar names right here. September, October, November, December. In the Bible, there is no name given to a month. It's just simply called first month, second month, third month. But watch this. September happens to align itself perfectly to 7th month. So September means 7th month, and it's aligned with the biblical 7th month. Could we actually see a vestigial sign of his calendar? Yes, that's exactly what we see. September, October, November, December. This becomes very obvious to those who speak the Spanish language, because these words all come from roots that they still use today for these numbers. So, to develop a biblical calendar, we must adjust this calendar to the seasons that have been affected by the cataclysmic changes. We also must name the days and the months. We've learned that pagans name their days and months after their gods, something that we do not want to do. We also learn that Israel allowed the Babylonian pagans to influence the names of their months, naming them after the gods of Babylon. They even have a month named Tammuz, the quintessential arch-enemy archetype of Jesus Christ himself, the absolute antithesis of all God stands for, Tammuz, the one whose birthday is on December the 25th. And they named a month after him. Now we must determine days and months and years. The solar calendar decided to go by the sun. This calendar was simply mathematically calculated to synchronize the calendar to the astronomical movements of the earth and sun. It's very simple. It's simple math. How many days divided by how many months, and the leap years will make up the difference. This calendar, however, is not found in the Scriptures. God makes no mention of the sun, equinoxes, or anything else determining the days. He has decided to use the moon as the marker of months. So, should we use a lunar calendar? Well, the lunar calendars that we look at are actually lunisolar calendars. This calendar is simply mathematically calculated to synchronize the calendar, the astronomical movements of the earth and the moon, and put them on a calendar that is a solar calendar. That doesn't have much value for us, because it's actually dependent upon the Gregorian calendar, the one we're trying to avoid. Well, what about the Hebrew calendar? The Hebrews developed a very good calendar, so should we use this? The Hebrew calendar is a mathematical calculation made to synchronize the calendar to the astronomical movements of the earth and the moon, taking into account the visibility of the crescents and the holy days. That sounds very good. Perhaps that's the calendar we should use. It is the finest calculation of moon phases ever established. You might even say it's inspired. However, the Hebrew calculations of the calendar are very, very difficult. They require 6 steps in general. We start with a known molad. Step 2, we determine the number of months to Tishri of this year. If we're going to try to develop the Hebrew calendar and understand it in terms of solar calendar, we must multiply the number of months by the length of that molad, and then add the results to the starting molad. Then step 5, we need to apply the dechiot. Now, what are dechiot? Dechiot is simply postponements. The Hebrews take great liberties in postponing months, days, holy days, and they move them around on the calendar for ease of execution of these holy days, so they don't interfere with their whatever traditions they happen to interfere with. And then, of course, step 6 would be to add the elapsed days to the Gregorian starting date. The calculations become very, very difficult. I'm not going to go through all these calculations, but you can see that step 1, step 2, step 3, these calculations become very, very detailed and very difficult. Now, I must ask you a question at this particular point. If you believe that you should keep the feast of the Lord in His proper times and on the proper days, I must ask you, who do you trust to tell you when those days are? Do you trust the rabbis to tell you? Is that wise? Shouldn't you calculate this calendar on your own? Shouldn't you have this calculation memorized and every year develop this calendar by yourself in your own house? Or do you trust the rabbis to tell you when those days are? We have to all answer these questions for ourselves. Because how do we know when the holy days are? How do we know we are on God's timeline if we don't take the initiative to calculate this for ourselves? But what happens? People go to the bookstore and buy a calendar, and they're just simply asking the rabbis, when do these dates occur? I want to keep the holy days, and they tell us when they are. Now, we've learned that to develop a biblical calendar, we must adjust the calendar to the seasons. We learned that we must name those days, months, and years, and then we must determine those days and months and years. We've seen how they did it with a solar calendar. We've learned what a lunisolar calendar is, and we learned how the Hebrews actually calculated that calendar. But I have some good news for you. And here's the good news. We don't need any of those calculations because Jehovah has restored His calendar to us. So how will we develop the calendar of Yahuveh? What we want to do is do it the Yahweh. Jehovah's way is very, very simple. As a matter of fact, it's all contained in the commandment, observe the month of Aviv. Could it be that simple? Yes, as a matter of fact, it is just that simple. Why would we do this? Because we want to offer unto the Lord in the Sabbaths and in the new moons and on the set feast by number according to the order commanded unto them. We should keep God's calendar on His calendar. Seems simple, but somehow it's escaped us. We need to be very careful that we do it according to how He said to do it. Observe the Aviv. Let's look at Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe the month of Aviv, and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God. For in the month of Aviv, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Exodus 23:14-15. Thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread as I commanded thee in the time appointed of the month of Aviv, for in it thou camest out of Egypt. Exodus 12:2 uses the word month. This month, the month of Aviv, shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year unto you. Exodus 12:2. Now, if we look at the word month, we find that it comes from the word Hodesh. Hodesh is translated new moon, month, monthly, first day of the month. But what does Hodesh actually mean? Hodesh actually means renewal. Therefore, it's not any moon, it is that new moon. It is the renewed moon. Exodus 12:2 could have just as faithfully been translated, this new moon shall be unto you the beginning of new moons. It shall be the first new moon of the year unto you. Now, why is this important? Because we need to know, when do the months begin and end? Hodesh, as I said, means renewal. Let's look at this on the chart and see if this becomes any more obvious. We're looking at the moon in its phases. We see that it begins small, grows larger, and then wanes back to another crescent, and then finally goes into obscurity. When the moon renews, it would have to be from the time that it has grown dark until the time that it returns. So, could the Hodesh actually mean full moon? I don't see how it could mean full moon, because at the full moon, we've already seen 14 moons at that point. So we're actually in the middle of the cycle when we say full moon. So how could that be the Hodesh? I don't believe it could be. So could it be conjunction? Now what's conjunction? This is when the moon is in between the sun and the earth. The earth cannot see the moon because of the brightness of the sun and because we're looking at the shadow side of the moon. This is conjunction, when it lines perfectly in between us and the sun. Now, at conjunction, we cannot see a moon. And the moon can remain in conjunction up to 3 days. So, could we decipher a time involved at conjunction without scientific equipment? No, of course not. So, could conjunction be the beginning of the month? No, I don't see how it could be. It certainly wouldn't have, this information wasn't available to the children of Israel. And if God actually wrote His commandments to His people, to farmers and to normal people like you and I, how would He expect us to know when conjunction was without mathematical calculation? Well, certainly He couldn't. How could something that spans 2 or 3 days be a marker of time? I don't see it. So what is this Hodesh? Wouldn't it be when the moon moves from total obscurity into that first visible crescent? When the moon reappears, when the moon renews, which is the definition of the word Hodesh. So, yes, the month would begin at the sign of the first crescent as it begins to grow toward full. Now, what about the commandment, observe the Aviv? Well, let me ask you, is it a commandment or is it not? Let's look at the Scripture. Deuteronomy 16:1, observe the month of Aviv and keep the Passover unto the Lord thy God, for in the month of Aviv the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. Exodus 23, thou shalt keep the feast of unleavened bread as I commanded thee in the time appointed of the month of Aviv, for in it thou camest from Egypt. Now, watch this. The word observe and keep in these two scriptures is the same word in Hebrew, shamar. Shamar means to keep, observe, heed, keeper, preserve, to beware of, to be aware of, to be a watchman for, to wait, to watch, to regard, to save to yourself this day. It sounds to me like he wants us to keep the month of Aviv, that he wants us to observe it. As a matter of fact, this word shamar actually appears in numerous places as his commandment to shamar the Sabbath, to keep the Sabbath. So, is observe the Aviv a commandment? I believe it is. I believe that this is part of our observation and worship of God, is to know His calendar. Now, okay, fine. If we're supposed to watch for the Aviv, what in the world is the Aviv? God told us that this time is the time that you came out of Egypt. So perhaps if we went back in time to see the barley, the stage of its ripeness, and and any description of it in that time that they came out of Egypt, we will find Aviv. Now, don't let the word Abib in your King James Bible throw you. It is simply the word Aviv in Hebrew. If you look in your Strongs, you'll find that Aviv was translated as in the ear, or green ears of corn, or fresh young barley ears, or the month of ear forming. Okay, you following this? As the barley ear was forming, in the season that happened, that month was called Aviv. Now, so are we just looking for ripe barley? Is that what we're looking for? Well, actually, no. Aviv, as I will show you, becomes a notch in time, a very small notch in time that is obvious exactly when it is. It's not green. It's certainly not a seed underground. And it's not ripe barley that's been set up for harvest or has been set away in a barn. Aviv is actually a Hebrew agricultural term that simply denotes a specific segment of time during ripening. Now, what the Bible says. The Bible says to observe, shamar, the month, the Hodesh of Aviv, and keep, shamar, the Passover unto the Lord thy God, for in it, in the month of, or in the Hodesh of Aviv, so forth. Now, the reason I put it this way is because you've learned several words. Now, let's translate this according to our understanding. Watch for the new moon of the tender barley. For in the new moon of barley ear forming, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. What you're seeing is the commandment to keep the Aviv coupled with the Hodesh. To define Aviv, we must go to the Scriptures, back to the days when they were brought out of Egypt. And let's look at the plagues of Egypt. There was a hail and fire mingled with hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bold. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. Now, Do you see the word? In the ear. This is what we understood to be Aviv. In the ear is Aviv. Let's look at another scriptural definition. Leviticus 2:14, thou shalt offer for the meat or the food offering of thy firstfruits green ears of corn. This is the word Aviv, green ears. Dried by the fire, even corn beaten out of full ears. Here we have a description of the reaction of Aviv barley to being parched and beaten out. Leviticus 23:14, and ye shall eat neither bread, nor parched corn, nor green ears, until the selfsame day that ye brought an offering unto the Lord your God. This is the commandment that Joshua obeyed in Joshua 5:11, and they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes, and parched corn in the selfsame day. So what we're learning about Aviv is it has certain characteristics that are only peculiar to Aviv barley, dried by the fire and beaten out. If you can't dry it by the fire and beat it out, it's not Aviv. Now, farmers that I know that know something about grain farming, something I know nothing about, say that grain has certain stages of milk stage and dough stage, and you can take green grain and parch it, and you won't get food. You can take ripe grain and try to parch it, and you won't get food. You just get dried grain. But there's a certain stage in the dough stage or somewhere around there that you can parch that, and you can strike it on something, and those seeds will fall off, and you can eat them. It becomes food. Well, we find that Aviv barley has that characteristic only at a certain stage in its life. So if we want to know what Aviv is, number one, it needs to be sprung up. Remember when it says the wheat and the rye were not sprung up? They were still underground. So what we were looking at were agricultural terms applied to these grains. We know that Aviv must be sprung up and out of the ground. We know that it must be capable of parching and becoming food. It must have the capability of being beaten out and removed from the stalk as edible seed to be Aviv. So, could Aviv be green? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it dry? What is that stage of ripeness that's such a small notch in such a small window of time? Well, we've learned that it can only be in that in-between time of dry barley that's ready for harvest and green barley that has sprung up. This is Aviv. Remember, in the month of Aviv, I brought you out of Egypt. So he says, we will mark that first month by barley. Watch for, be a watchman for, that new moon of tender barley, of Aviv barley. For in that new moon of barley ear forming, the Lord thy God brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. He's told us how to find the first month in His year. And now you know how to do that. Now, what the Bible does not say, what it does not say is, trust your rabbi to tell you, or check the calendar out for the month of Nisan, and keep the Passover unto the Lord your God for some time around the month of March or April. I brought you forth out of one of those countries down there. I think it was Egypt. See, that kind of imprecision and foolishness does not exist in the vocabulary of God, and it certainly doesn't exist in His eternal plan. We were not to take our instructions from rabbis. We were to take our instructions from nature itself, which is in the control of our God. Can you trust this man? I certainly don't want to, nor do I have to, because our God actually has shown us how to determine the first month of our year. Take, for example, we're awaiting the end of 12th month and the beginning of the new year. We look out of our window and we see the crescent. We see it. It's in the evening right there. It's beautiful. We know that when that sun goes down, that a month is beginning. Now, here's the question. Is the next day the beginning of 13th month, or is the next day the beginning of first month? Well, actually, you don't have enough information yet. You have to ask another question. Is the barley Aviv? If the barley is Aviv and you see the Hodesh, you know that the year has begun. If you see the Hodesh and the barley is not Aviv, it's 13th month. You wait another month. You do that postponing time in order to let nature, the cataclysmically changed universe, catch up with God's calendar. This is the way He has decided to keep the calendar in balance with the seasons. Now, I don't know the stage of barley. How am I supposed to know the stage of barley in Israel? You know, I live in the United States. Do you know that our God actually made a provision for those who are out of the land? Of all the holy days that God has instituted, that He said are perpetual and forever, only one holy day did He say you can postpone it for 1 month. Now, what day is that? Well, it happens to be this Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread time. How can that be? Because in these days when this information moved very, very slowly, the information about whether the barley is Aviv, whether the Hodesh was sited in Jerusalem, had to travel over long distances. And He made a provision that if you weren't in the land, I've got a special deal for you. You see, when the Hodesh was sited, it was their policy, it was their procedure to light signal fires that went across the mountains and sent that information all around the country that the new year had indeed begun, that the new month had indeed begun. The signal fires sent the message like teletype across the land of Israel and indeed into other countries. Messengers were set off by foot with that news, and they set out for other countries, finding people who cared about the calendar of God and who wanted to keep their holy days, but the information took time to get there. Now, what's all the hubbub? You see, this news traveled on foot to the outlying areas, and Jehovah had to make provision for those who were out of the land because, hey, when that Hodesh was sighted and the barley was Aviv, it was first month 1. That means in 10 days, they have to have Passover prepared and ready. They have to have that Passover lamb prepared by the 10th day. It has to be at least selected by the 10th day. There's only 10 days to get ready. Well, the news couldn't travel in that amount of time. So He made the provision, speaking to the children of Israel, saying, if any man of you or your posterity, that's us, shall be unclean, or in a journey afar off, yet, or even though, he shall keep the Passover unto the Lord. The 14th day of the 2nd month at even, they shall keep it. This allowed time for those who were afar off to get the news and make proper preparation. Isn't God good? Now, today in our time that we live, that same information can cover the entire planet in 10 seconds. So our time has come. We can get the information from Israel. We can know the Hodesh. We can know the state of the ripening of the barley in Israel and keep God's calendar on time every time. What an exciting time to be alive. Let's do it the Yahweh. It's simple. It's self-evident. It's self-correcting. It's self-explanatory. It's available to every man on the earth. It's controllable by Yahuveh Himself and not another person. It's untouchable by unscrupulous men. It's untouched by paganism, uncomplicated by science, and uninhibited by religion. There are no educational, language, or ethnic barriers to keeping the calendar of Yahuveh. Have you seen the moon? You saw His calendar. It's for every man on the earth, not for a select few, not for a bunch of cigar-smoking bureaucrats in some behind closed doors, not for a bunch of collar-wearing clergymen that's stuffed off in some convent somewhere, not for a bunch of monks up on a hill, not for a bunch of rabbis stuffed into a temple room somewhere that's deciding what the months are. It's painted across His sky. You can look up and see the calendar of God. The Yahweh, that's the best way. And He said unto them, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons which the Father has put into His own power. Now, isn't it a shame that we've taken this Scripture and taught people that you're not to know the calendar of God, when actually it's teaching that we're not to keep a calendar that is not in God's power. You see, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father has put in His own power. God has put the times and the seasons in His power. If He decides He needs another day, He can wipe clouds over Israel and add a day to His calendar. If He decides He needs another month to work out the salvation of you or me or our loved ones, He can simply set the barley aside 1 month and add a month to His entire year. He can do what He wants. He's in charge of His calendar, and it's all His, and no man can touch it anywhere. The words of Yeshua teach that we are not to live into the future. A calendar allows us to live into the future, when God's calendar actually teaches us something totally different. We are to live day by day. Day by day we receive the daily bread. We are to seek first the kingdom of God and take no thought for the morrow. What's sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. He gives us our days month at a time, no further. There's no way you can plan more than 30 days in advance and know the date upon which something is to occur, if you're keeping God's calendar. Because it forces us to live day to day to day. Do you know, we don't know exactly when or how many days it is from now until Feast of Tabernacles. We don't know how many days it is. It could be this number of days. It could be that number of days. It could be off by a day. We don't know. And we don't know the time of His coming in the same way. The day which no man knows. How do you know when Feast of Trumpets is? How do you know when the first day of the sacred year is? How can you be sure? You cannot be sure, but I believe that He plans it just that way. Now that we have His calendar, now that we can do what He requires of us, and now that His calendar is made available to us, I ask you a question. Why would we hold to a Gregorian calendar? Why would we even think that He is going to execute His plan of eternity on a Gregorian calendar? Well, there are some reasons why you want to keep a Gregorian calendar, especially if you want to be compliant with the world. That's the calendar they use.